I would like to thank you organizers for inviting us, and I have a pleasure to share with you Georgian e-procurement system reforms which we undertake since 2010. So Georgian state procurement system was labeled as a high-risk system in 2009, and after 2009, when we started to reform procurement system, it was ranked as it achieved highest rating in a ranking. So before the reforms, we had 100% paper-based tenders, lack of transparency due to the fact that all tenders were announced in the newspaper, and access to this newspaper was not very wide, especially in the regions. So this resulted in lack of transparency, non-reliable data, high compliance cost. To participate in tenders, private sector representatives had to gather a lot of documentations, and for each of them they had to pay certain cost. So that's why it was also time consuming and very costly to participate in the tenders. Competition was restricted due to the lack of transparency, especially in the regions. And geographical inequality, because all tenders were announced, as I mentioned, in newspaper, and this newspaper was not accessible, especially in the regions, in mountain regions, and high risk of corruption. All this resulted in high risk of corruption. So now I would like to share with you stages of Georgian e-procurement reforms. So we started to reform our state procurement system in 2010. And in 2010 we developed an electronic platform in-house. Especially, I would like to underline this because we had the choice to buy from the shelf, and it was 10 times costly. And at the same time, in-house system which we use now is more versatile, and there is no maintenance or service cost for our platform. In August 2010, Georgian e-procurement system was launched in a test mode. And in October 2010, first electronic tender was announced. In December, paper-based tenders were abolished completely, and also in December 2010 we established dispute resolution board which reviews all disputes regarding the procurement, regarding state procurement. After 1 year of the reform, we generated $100 million savings. And I would like to explain what we mean under the savings. When procuring entity announces tenders, they are obliged to indicate estimated value of the procurement. And after tender, when contract is already signed, amount for which contract is signed, difference between the estimated value and contract value is saving. So in 1 year's period, we generated $100 million equivalent in saving. In 2011, our system was bilingual already. And by 2015, we have more than 28,000 registered users in the system. And by September 2015, total saving was 1 billion Georgian lari, which is almost 14% of estimated value. So nowadays we have 100% electronic tenders. Our slogan is everyone sees everything, because system is very transparent and any person can have an access to which has access to the internet can see all tenders, which is very transparent, all procuring entities who are announcing tenders. We have a smart system preventing of mistakes. So even if procuring entity announces tenders and by mistake you enter incorrect deadline or any other information, system automatically prevents this mistake. So we have a business intelligence system which generates 70 real-time reports at the same time. And also we have internal messaging system. Any supplier who is registered in the system can get SMS message when tender on certain CPV code is announced. We have in a year we have average about more than 30,000 tenders announced. So it's not easy all the time, every day, to sit in a computer and check interested fields. So once supplier is subscribed, so automatically supplier can get SMS message if tender is announced on this particular CPV codes. And also we have, as I mentioned, dispute resolution board, which acts very fast and is very efficient, handling our dispute resolution board efficiently handles all disputes. To show our current procurement framework, is our logo is like this squared window. From one side we have public sector, on another side we have private sector, and in the middle we are represented as a state procurement agency, and these windows are transparent, which underlines transparency of Georgian e-procurement. So from public sector side, we have about 4,446 registered procuring entities in the system. And on average, annual spending on public procurement is 3 billion Georgian lari, which is about 10% of GDP. And as I mentioned, number of open tenders is about 30,000 each year. And estimated value, 80% of total tenders, value of total tenders is less than 50,000 Georgian lari, which gives access to small and medium companies to participate in the tenders. And about 14% of savings is generated annually. From private sector side, supply side, we have more than 23,000 suppliers or private sector representatives registered in the system. Number of foreign companies exceeds 670, and I should underline that any company, even from any part of the world, from Australia or New Zealand, can register in the system, and from their country they can participate in the tenders, and they can observe all the tenders which are announced in the system. Number of registered bidders in the system looks like following. In 2011 we had 7,360 registered users, which gradually increased up to 23,000 in 2015. . So this is contract value by year. In 2011, annual budget on public procurement was 2.6 billion, which increased up to 2.8 in 2014, and by 2015 it exceeded a little bit exceeded 3 billion Georgian lari. Increased number of tenders by years. So you can see in 2014 we had 31,383 tenders, and in 2015 more than 34,000 tenders. Here you can see foreign companies, foreign suppliers participating in Georgian state procurement. So biggest share, by the way, is comes to the Ukrainian companies. 155 Ukrainian companies are participating in Georgian state procurement. The Dispute Resolution Board, as I mentioned, was created in December 2010, and this board reviews all dispute cases regarding the state procurement. Dispute Resolution Board exist within the framework of a state procurement agency, and it consists of 6 members, 3 representatives of a state procurement agency, and 3 representatives from civil sector. So this ensures transparency of the Dispute Resolution Board, and any entity or person can appeal any tender just by clicking one button, and after clicking this button, tender is freezed, and the procuring entity is not allowed to sign contract with the winner until Dispute Resolution Board reviews this case. So Dispute Resolution Board reviews these cases in 10 business days, and after this procuring entity can proceed with the tenders according to the decision of Dispute Resolution Board. However, I should mention that the decision of Dispute Resolution Board can be appealed in the court, but we had very few cases appealing DRB decision in the court, which underlines competence of Dispute Resolution Board and trust which is given to this body. So here you can see number of appeals by year. In 2011 we had only 68 appeals, and by 2015 it went up to 1,018 cases. So this figure underlines that trust in Dispute Resolution Board is increasing over the years. So this is very promising figure. Just to say a couple of words about our system. E-procurement system is as I mentioned, is very transparent. It's very simple to use. It's multilingual. It's on 3 languages: Georgian, English, and in Russian, and user-friendly. So you don't need to be highly competent in IT to use our system. So. And all procurement-related information is available in the system, and any interested person can search any tenders by procuring entities, by CPV code, and the system has a lot of filters, so by tender type, we have several types of tender, so it's very user-friendly system. And also communication with contracting authority is very transparent, and any interested person, even not registered person, can log in as from the guest mode, and you can see in transparent manner communication between procuring entity and supplier. If supplier has some question to the procuring entity or regarding some certain tender, so you can see all this communication online. So, as I mentioned, our slogan is "Everyone sees everything." So, any procuring entity, when I say that our system is transparent, it's not only that all tenders are available online, but you can see annual procurement plan for each procuring entity. Procuring entity is obliged to submit annual procurement plan by November 20th and for the next year. So any supplier who is interested to participate in the tenders can search by procuring entities. So what are annual procuring plan of those procuring entities. So according to this, suppliers can plan their business activity. Tender notice is also transparent, and as I mentioned, subscribed registered users can subscribe to SMS messages, SMS service, and they can get SMS messages on the phone regarding certain tender. All questions and answers are also transparent. Tenders, bids, you can see bidding process. We have also reverse auction. Once bid is submitted, then starts 3-round reverse auction. Each round lasts 2 minutes. And after each round we have a 2-minute break, and then the second round commences, and altogether we have 3 rounds, and after 3 rounds, lowest price is the winner. After the tender is conducted, decision on certain tender, each procuring entity has the tender committee inside of their organization, and they procuring entity have to upload decision on certain tender in the system. So you can see in the system a tender committee decision regarding completed tenders. And all relevant correspondence, whatever is requested from the supplier. All these documentations are uploaded in the system. And of course, finally, all contracts and amendments to the contracts are uploaded in the system, so you can see completed tenders with the contract, and you can observe those contracts. So it's very transparent. And also payments also is transparent, and everyone can see all the payments made for certain tender. So our Georgian state procurement system gained international acknowledgements. United Nations ranked in the second place in the category of preventing and combating corruption. OECD gave also high consideration to the Georgian e-procurement system. Europe, as well as European Parliament, EBRD ranked in the first place among EBRD regional countries. World Bank also gave its high consideration Georgian e-procurement system, and now I should underline that from 2014 World Bank started to use Georgian e-procurement system for their local World Bank financed projects, and all World Bank procurement is conducted through our electronic system. This was like kind of breakthrough, and now we are negotiating with Asian Development Bank. Also Asian Development Bank also gave its high consideration to the Georgian e-procurement system, and we are on the process to finalize negotiations with the ADB, and ADB will also start using Georgian e-procurement system for their projects. And just recently, a week ago, we completed negotiations with the European Investment Bank, and the European Investment Bank is also using Georgian e-procurement system for their procurement. One of the weakest points of state procurement in Georgia was direct contracting. Direct contracting is kind of contracting when procuring entity negotiates directly to the supplier without any tender. And this was the biggest challenge to decrease share of direct procurement in the total procurement, state procurement. And in 2013, share of direct procurement was 39%, and 2014 we reduced direct procurement to 32%. And in 2015, we undertook type of reform to even reduce number of direct procurement. So since 2015, any procurement agency, any procuring entity who is willing to go through direct contracting had to apply to each procurement, to the state procurement agency, and we are reviewing those applications, direct procurement applications, and giving no objection. So without our no objection, procuring entity cannot proceed with direct contracting. But before this reform, contracting entity was making negotiation directly, and afterwards, after signing contract was uploaded in the system. So we had this information post factum, but from 2015, procuring entities are no longer as free as they used to be to make direct contract. They have to apply to the state procurement agency and get our permission for direct contracting. And this module was integrated in the system, and any participant, any interested person can see in the module, in this module, which procuring entity is announcing direct contracting, and how this application is reviewed by our system, and all this information is transparent. So now a couple of words on consolidated tenders. Consolidated tenders are type of centralized purchasing, centralized procurement, and consolidating tenders are also announced through our system. But difference is that state procurement agency is directly involved in conducting consolidated tenders. And we are conducting these tenders on behalf of the government. Consolidated tenders are announced on a limited number of goods. It's announced on fuel, computers, papers, tires, and for cellular services. consolidated tenders are huge tenders, and we are, on behalf of the government, we are procuring those goods for the government, and after tender is completed, all government entities can get supplies of those goods without announcing tenders. So they are free to not to announce tenders on fuel, on tires, on computers. So we are doing on behalf of the government for them. So advantage of consolidated tender is that it reduces number of no bids received, because these are huge tenders. For example, in fuel, I think it was last year's figure, we procured 100 million liters of fuel. So you can imagine scope of the contract. So participation in the consolidated tender is very high, and it also saves a lot of money for procuring entities. This procurement is also very transparent. It reduces administrative resources because our agency is announcing tenders on behalf of other state agencies. So it's one-time tender instead of, imagine 4,000 procuring entities announce tender for fuel. We are announcing one tender, and for whole year, winning company is supplying to the state agencies with those goods, fuel, computers, and so on. As I mentioned, in consolidated tenders we have several goods: fuel, cellular communication, computers, printing papers, and tires. Only on those goods we have consolidated tenders. On other goods, each procuring entity is responsible to procure for themselves. It's a type of centralized purchasing. And now I will share with you these figures. For example, fuel quantity procured was, as I mentioned, almost almost 100 million liters. Computer was 24,800 computer was purchased. Paper was like almost 500,000 packages, and tires 14,000, more than 14,000. So, and saving generated from consolidated tender, you can see from these figures. So now a couple of words on design contest module. Sorry. Design, in 2015 we introduced design contest module in the e-procurement system. As I mentioned before, Georgian state procurement was based it was based on the lowest price. The lowest price was a winner. But in design contest, until 2015, still design contests were conducted on a paper-based, because in design and architectural works, you cannot judge only by price. So we introduced this reform and integrated design contest module in the system. So it based on price and quality criteria. Firstly, suppliers submitting their quality side work, and the procuring entity is evaluating quality, and then comes price. So for quality, procuring entity can give from 70 to 80% share of total value, and price value is from 20 to 30%. So even higher price price supplier can win the tender if from the quality side procuring entity scores higher scores on the quality. And now e-planning of procurement. So as I mentioned in previous slides, Georgian e-procurement system gives information not only on available tenders but also on you can see procurement plans of procuring entity, so on a quarterly basis. So procuring entities are obliged to upload their annual procurement plan, so you can observe in the system what are the procuring plans during the year for certain procuring entities. So this is how our system looks like. So you can log in the system from the procurement.gov.g or tenders.procurement.gov.g, and you can see our e-procurement system and search all those information which I underlined in my presentation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was very detailed. It was great. Questions? Please.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I heard a couple of times that you mentioned some savings due to use of your electronic system. Could you please explain a little more about the benchmarking? How do you calculate your savings? Because you mentioned up to 14% of the estimated value. What's estimated value means, and how do you do that benchmarking, and what's the methodology of calculating your savings? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Each procuring entity, when procuring entity announces tenders, they have to do market research. For example, if procurement is announced for certain works, for example, to build a road, procuring entity has to search in the market what is the price to build 1 kilometer of the road and give estimate value. For example, 1 kilometer would cost 1 million Georgian lari. This is how estimated value is derived, and after announcing tenders, bidders submit their bid. They cannot submit bid higher than estimated value. If bid is submit for 500,000, saving is 500,000. So this is how saving is calculated. Estimated value less contract price, because in all cases, in many cases, most of the cases, contract value is below estimated value. So this is how we calculate saving.
Okay. Anyone else?
Скажите, пожалуйста, у меня вопрос по поводу прямого заключения договора, когда заказчик определяет напрямую поставщика. Вы говорили, что он согласовывает это заключение договора с вашим агентством. Агентство может отказать в заключении и на каких основаниях?
Sure, of course. The meaning of this reform was that before the reform, we got this information post factum that the contracting entity was making direct contract with some certain supplier, so they were free to make contract with the supplier, and to reduce this and to restrict the direct contracting, we introduced this reform, and now procuring entity has to apply for direct contracting by justifying need of direct contracting and filling all those questionnaire which is given in the module, and this module is in the system, integrated in the system. And after application, our agency reviews this case by case, and we have 3 days to review direct contracting application. And of course there are a lot of cases when we refuse to let the contracting entity sign a contract. Unfortunately, by now I do not have figures how this reform resulted in the figures, because we started to use this system from November 2015, so we don't have much time to generate this analysis at the moment. Of course, a state procurement agency is in a position to refuse for certain application. And I should also mention that direct contracting is allowed only below 5,000 Georgian lari. If contract exceeds 5,000 Georgian lari is about $2,000 US, and this is annual budget. You cannot procure more than 5,000 during the year. It's not one-time procurement, but it's annual. So if annual total procurement exceeds 5,000, then you can automatically you cannot go to direct contracting. Direct contracting is only available below 5,000. And after 5,000, from 5,000 to 100,000, we have simplified electronic tender, and above 100,000 we have electronic tender. Difference between simplified and electronic tender is just deadline of submitting bids. So simplified electronic is more has a smaller deadline, so you can conduct this tender in a very short period. But after 100,000, procuring entity has to announce e-procurement, which has duration of 15 days after making tender announcement. So this is just to give you a picture. Direct contracting is only available below 5,000. After 5,000 goes simplified procurement, and then above goes just electronic procurement procedure.
Наталья.
Скажите, пожалуйста, для участия в тендере в Грузии является ли необходимым условием внесение тендерной гарантии?
Yes. If procuring entity goes on electronic tender, then guarantee is required. For simplified electronic tender, guarantee is not required. Because electronic tender goes beyond 100,000, and this also brings this also is more risky project. So above 100,000 guarantee is required, but we have in the system blacklisted and whitelisted companies. If company violates agreement, or if it's disqualified from tender, procuring entity can review case and can make this company as a blacklisted. So blacklisted companies have no right to participate in tenders during 1 year. But we on the opposite, we have white list. On the white list, we have companies with good reputation, good record of fulfilling their obligations and contracts, and whitelisted company, there are some cases when they are not required, even on electronic tenders, they are not required to submit guarantee, because whitelist gives kind of proof that company is trustworthy. So.
А скажите, внесение гарантии осуществляется через грузинские банки?
Через грузинский и иностранным банкам тоже можно.
Могут иностранные
Да,
банки тоже вносить, да? Хорошо, спасибо.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Скажите, пожалуйста, по поводу централизованных закупок. Поставщик определяется один по всей стране или по региону отдельно проводится, по каждому региону отдельно проводится тендер?
No, well, in case of consolidated tenders, supplier, there might be several suppliers. For example, in a fuel case, we have, you have different types of fuel, and for each type of fuel, tender announced separately, and for each type of fuel, supplier can be different. So one type of fuel, for example, diesel supplier can be one company, and petrol supplier for certain type of petrol could be another company. So it's not obligatory to have one winner. Even in the computers, for example, in cellular phones, we have 3 companies operating in Georgia, but only 2 companies only 2 companies met requirements of tender committee, and those 2 companies are dividing market. So in cellular communication, we have 2 companies providing services. So
In the front.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting, and it seems that Georgia has done a tremendous amount of work in implementing this e-procurement system. The one slide that really jumped out at me, and I'd be curious for your views on it, was the DRB slide with the number of cases being brought forward to the DRB, sort of increasing over time to, I think it was about 1,300 having brought forward in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And it just sort of struck me as being a very high number of cases brought forward. And I'm just wondering if that's partly due to the fact that in Georgia there isn't an informal system where suppliers can first go to the procuring entity to address a concern or complaint before going to the DRB to say, we haven't received any satisfaction from the procuring entity, we now need to escalate it. I'm curious about that number, because it just seems very high compared to, for example, the Canadian experience.
Sure, okay, thank you for your question. Let me go to this slide. Here. In 2015 we had 1,018 cases, and in 2011 it started from 68. Suppliers, of course, can communicate usually with the procuring entity, but in case of mistreatment of suppliers or misconducting some rules, suppliers can appeal to the state procurement agency. For example, if procuring entity announces tender and the supplier thinks that this tender is biased to a certain company or whatever, so in a way it's senseless to appeal to this procuring entity. So that's why suppliers appeal to the DRB and we encourage them to appeal to DRB because, as you see from these figures, increasing these cases is due to the fact that trust in operation of DRB is increasing. So we don't have such dramatic increase in number of tenders, but increase is very dramatic in dispute cases, which underlines that the DRB functions efficiently and handles those issues efficiently. And the figure which we have that appeal to the court is very low. It's about 1% or something like this. So this also means that the DRB decision is also considered as objective decision. So parties do not appeal afterwards to the court in very few cases. And in several cases which this was taken to the court, court made decision in favor of DRB decision. So this also underlines the competence of DRB, and that's why we have such dramatic increase in dispute cases.
Thank you. I saw a question in the back. No, sorry, right at the back. Yeah.
Вопрос. Согласно правил электронных закупок, все участники в процессе торгов обозначаются инкогнито, то есть не обозначаются имена участников для того, чтобы не было нечестной конкуренции. В случае участия иностранной компании, каким образом происходит последующая верификация этой компании и каким образом сохранить вот эту инкогнито в случае внесения залоговой стоимости участия в тендере иностранной компании через иностранные банки? Вот как защищается?
Well, first of all, I should say that it's participation in a tender is not incognito, so everyone can see the companies who are participating in a tender. And also their bid price is transparent. And regarding the foreign companies, to participate in a tender, you need to be registered in a system. So there is a certain procedures if a supplier wants to register in a system, there are certain procedures and requirements to be registered. And once you are registered, you can participate in any tender, and there is no issue there that how to say mistreating your bid or whatever. So, and in case of big contracts, you have to submit guarantee, and if you refuse from your bid or whatever, you will be disqualified. And second company who has second best price will be the winner, and you will be blacklisted. So there is it's senseless to manipulate in this case.
Can I?
Sorry, he was first.
Очень хороший доклад, спасибо. У меня вопрос. Вот вы сказали, да, план государственных закупок до 20 ноября вывешивать на портале, да? А государственный бюджет когда принимается?
Well, state budget is adopted by the end of the year. By August, draft budget has to submit it to the parliament, and then by the end of the year it should be adopted. But when companies are making their e-procurement plan, you can always make amendment or changes. But of course, it should be in correlation with your annual budget, and beyond this budget, unless you make correction. If, for example, if in certain budget line you don't have sufficient funds, you cannot announce tender. And you have to make adjustment, and it should be in correlation with your annual budget. So it's up to the procuring specialist to plan next year's budget, which should be in correlation with the company budget.
Это предварительный план государственных закупок, да?
Yes, да, предварительно, конечно.
Потом еще второй вопрос. Вот по экономии, да? В вашем слайде видно, что это на количество тоже сэкономили, да? А количество как можно сэкономить?
Нет, количества нет.
Не, вот в вашем слайде. Номер слайда нет тут. Экономия. Вот, например, топливо или компьютер 24 800 штук, 24
Нет, 24 800 это количество, которое было куплено. Сейчас я покажу. Значит, 24 800 это количество куплено, а здесь уже сколько сэкономили? 9 миллионов.
Экономия, да?
Да, экономия.
Потом вот еще один вопрос, да? Вот, например, $100. За $100 мы хотели купить компьютер, да? За $90 купили. $10 это экономия, да?
Да, правильно.
$10 где-то останется вот, на накопительном счету у закупающей организации, либо возвращается в бюджет, или он его обратно может использовать.
Нет, в бюджет не возвращается, это остается у
закупающего.
Да, у закупающего.
Он обратно может закупать,
Да,
наверное.
конечно, да, конечно.
А потом еще один вопрос по централизованной закупке, да? Вот, например, если по ГСМу, вот, например, централизованно, где-то, если у них нету заправок где-то отдаленных районах, там и другие поставщики могут участвовать, да?
В отдельных случаях, да. Если,
вот,
если в горах нет таких станций.
Вот, например, компания, допустим, Роснефть, да? Вот по центральной части, например, Грузии, Тбилиси, в больших городах у них заправительные станции имеются, да? А отдаленных районах у них, соответственно, нету. То тогда те регионы может приезжать или как-то другие участники могут участвовать.
Да, и в таких случаях другие тоже могут поставляться. Ну, это уже договор как состоится.
А потом вот тендер проводится за единицу или на общее количество? Вот,
Нет,
например,
тендер проводится на цену.
на цену, да, за
Да,
литр? За
да,
литр.
за литр на цену. И там количество приблизительно, можно уточнить, приблизительно, но никто не знает в следующем году сколько закупим, например, бензин. Ну, там уточняется цена в тендере.
Я вот в нашей республике тоже хотим как бы применить централизованные государственные закупки, да? Сейчас у нас проблема в чем? Вот, например, где Бишкек, там Чуйская область, да, где густонаселенные, там компаний, которые поставщиков много. Например, где-то отдаленные районы Баткенской области, да, там крупных компаний нету. В основном частные, вот я имею одну заправительную станцию, такие только поставщики. Вот у нас проблема, как бы за единицу, за литр бензина провести по регионам, да? Вот потом несколько компаний мы выбираем, из них, допустим, кто соответствует ихним требованиям, где-то орган местного самоуправления, отдаленных, да, с ними подписывает. В вашем случае тоже так же, да?
In our case, when tender is announced, there are certain requirements for the suppliers. They have to meet these requirements. But of course we have some cases if in remote areas or in mountain regions there is a lack of those stations. We review this case by case, on a case by case basis. So it's not like a unified approach to this problem. We review this case by case, but generally speaking, only those companies who meet tender requirements, they can participate in the tenders. So if you don't meet those requirements, you cannot participate. But there are some special cases, especially in the mountain regions, when we review those cases case by case. So it's not a unified approach to this problem.
Can I ask one question? Your organization seems to be very multifunctional. You are managing the electronic system. You are now doing ex-ante control of the direct contracts. You are now, seems to me, acquired the function of centralized purchasing body. And at the same time, you are acting as a review body. Isn't it a little bit contradictory, or do you plan any modifications in your system? Because if you're a centralized purchasing body, you're actually a contracting authority. So people have to complain against yourself and to your own review authority. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, very interesting question. I should say that we are not a purchasing entity. We, in case of consolidated tenders, we are not as a procuring entity. We are just entity who is organizing tender on behalf of the government. And also, difference between procuring entity and between our agencies that each procuring entity has a tender committee inside of this entity. And in our case, when consolidated tenders are conducted, tender committee is under the Prime Minister's office, functions in the Prime Minister's office, and the tender committee decides and makes tender requirement. We do not. Tender committee, which under the Prime Minister makes tender documentation, tender requirements and tender criteria. We are just conducting tenders, but we are not procuring. We don't procure. We announce tenders, and once the winner is already known, each procuring entity then signs contract with this supplier. So we are not in a position to sign contract. As I mentioned, we have more than 4,000 procuring entity, and in case of consolidated tender, for example, for fuel, when tender is conducted, those 4,000 entities go to this winning supplier and they sign contract with the supplier. So we are just conducting on behalf of the government, but we don't procure.
Yeah, that's clear, but that's one of the functions of the centralized purchasing body, acting as an agent. But still, you're organizing something, you are involved in the process, and if there is a mistake, who I could complain to your own review body?
Well, in case of consolidated tender, if there are some dispute cases, sure, companies can appeal to the DRB, and in this case, they appeal not against us, but against tender committee, which functions under the Prime Minister's office. So, as I mentioned, in DRB we have 6 members, 3 from civil society and 3 members from the State Procurement Agency. So DRB is not how to say, integrated fully in our structure. We have 3 society members from civil society, so they are free, of course, to make their decision. And until now, there was no such a case when those type of problem was created. So.
У меня 3 вопроса, если позволите. Да? Так, первый вопрос. За подачу жалобы предусматривается ли плата участникам?
No fee.
Нет, спасибо. Второй вопрос. Могут ли меняться условия договора, я имею в виду стоимость договора в случае инфляции?
Может, в районе 10%.
Так, спасибо. И третий вопрос. Какой источник финансирования вашего агентства? Вы с бюджета финансируетесь, либо на самофинансирование?
Нет, мы на самофинансирование. Значит, each procuring entity, when announces tenders, they have to pay some certain fee, and also private companies who are participating in the tender, there is a tender participation fee. Tender participation fee, and this is our income, so we don't depend on state budget.
А какая плата? Скажите, пожалуйста.
$50 за участие в тендере. In case of consolidated tenders, it depends. It can be up to 5,000 Georgian lari.
Okay, Laurie.
Thank you, and thank you for answering so many questions. You had a very interesting statistic about Ukrainian companies being 155, the largest number of foreign suppliers. I was wondering if maybe you could speak about what sectors they tend to be involved in, if you have any sense. Is it agriculture, industry, services? Do they do big contracts or small contracts? And secondly, can also foreign suppliers register to receive the SMS notification?
Yeah, sure. When you are registered in the system, you provide your phone number, and the system automatically sends SMS messages even foreign companies. And regarding the Ukrainian company, to be honest, I don't have these figures from which sector they. I assume that it's from trade, but I don't think that it's agriculture. But if we log in the system, we can search for these companies, and we can see in which field they operate. But at the moment, I do not have these statistics.
Thank you. If you have any more questions, our speakers are going to be available after lunch for private conversations. Also, we're a little behind schedule, so we'll take a coffee break, and I'll see you back here at 25 past.